Winter, New York City, early 1900s. A freezing wind cuts across the avenue, turning rain to sleet against the glass. Inside an electric streetcar, passengers huddle under heavy coats, their breath rising in the cold. Slight front, the driver faces a different problem entirely. Every few blocks, the streetcar slows. The glass has turned opaque, caked in ice and gray city grime. To see the track ahead, he has two choices. Swing open the front window and take the freezing air directly in his face, or stop the car, step outside into oncoming traffic, and wipe the glass clean by hand. Passengers grumble. The schedule slips. Somewhere behind him, a horse-drawn cart nearly collides with the stalled trolley in the low visibility. When I was an accepted hazard of city transit, a miserable inconvenience that everyone simply endured, because nobody had ever seriously tried to fix it. Everyone except for one woman sitting near the front, watching the driver struggle. Her name was Mary Anderson, 36 years old, a real estate developer from Birmingham, Alabama, visiting New York on business. Anderson was not an engineer. She had no formal training in mechanics, no workshop, no patent attorney on retainer. What she had was something rarer: the instinct to look at a problem everyone else had simply stopped noticing. She had already built a career on that instinct. Back in Birmingham, she'd financed and constructed an apartment building, run a cattle ranch and vineyard in California, and managed property on her own terms, in an era when few women did business independently at all. While other passengers accepted the cold as the price of the ride, Anderson pulled out a sketchbook and began to draw. She's idea was elegantly simple: a lever mounted inside the car within easy reach of the driver's hand. Outside, connected through the frame, a spring-loaded arm holding a rubber blade. One pull of the lever, and the blade would sweep across the glass in a clean arc, then swing back to rest out of the driver's line of sight entirely. Slow right down again, quiet, almost reverent. The driver would never have to open the window again. This chapter is about process, not emotion. Back in Birmingham, Anderson spent months turning a sketch into a working mechanism. She had a wooden model built by a local manufacturer, testing how the counterweight kept the blade pressed firmly against the glass, how the spring returned the arm to its resting position without the driver needing to think about it twice. She designed the whole assembly to be removable. In fair weather, the wiper could be taken off entirely, leaving nothing to mar the usual appearance of the car, as her own patent application would later put it. On June 18, 1903, she filed her application with the U.S. Patent Office. 5 months later, on November 10, 1903, she was awarded U.S. Patent number 743,801 for a window cleaning device for electric cars and other vehicles. It was the first workable windshield wiper ever patented in the United States. The timing, though, was cruel. In 1903, the automobile was still a plaything for the wealthy. Open-topped, slow, rarely driven past 20 miles an hour, built for fair-weather Sunday outings rather than daily transportation. Most cars on the road that year had no windshield at all. In 1905, Anderson wrote to a Canadian manufacturing firm, hoping to sell them the rights outright. Their reply survives in her family's archives to this day. The company wasn't hostile, just dismissive. They told her, in effect, that they saw no commercial future in her invention and weren't willing to put their name behind selling it. That single letter was the only serious sales attempt Anderson ever made. After that, the drawings went into a drawer, and she went back to managing real estate. Anderson wasn't the only inventor whose idea outran the market, and she wasn't the last woman the industry would overlook. In 1917, 14 years after Anderson's patent, a Nashville woman named Charlotte Bridgewood patented an electric version of the windshield wiper, using rotating rollers instead of a swinging blade. In principle, it was the direct ancestor of the automatic wiper systems in every car built today. Bridgewood ran her own manufacturing company. She wasn't an outsider pitching a stranger's factory. Even so, she couldn't get the auto industry to adopt her design either. Like Anderson, she never earned a cent from it. Two women, more than a decade apart, arrived independently at essentially the same idea. The industry passed on both of them. Then, slowly, the world caught up to the problem Mary Anderson had already solved years earlier. Enclosed car bodies became standard. Driving speeds climbed. Weather stopped being a reason to leave the car in the garage. By the early 1910s, wipers of various designs, many following Anderson's basic principle of a blade on a pivoting arm, were starting to appear on production vehicles. In 1920, Anderson's 17-year patent quietly expired. She had held the exclusive rights to the idea for the entire stretch of years in which nobody wanted it, and lost them the moment the market finally caught up. 2 years later, in 1922, Cadillac became the first major automaker to install windshield wipers as standard equipment on every car it built. Within a handful of years, the mechanism was universal, a small, unremarkable fixture on every windshield on Earth. Mary Anderson never received a single dollar from any of it. If it feels like this pattern was a one-time injustice of the early 1900s, history says otherwise. In 1963, an engineer named Robert Kearns built a device inspired by the human eye, wipers that paused between sweeps instead of moving constantly, useful in light rain or mist. He installed it in his own car, patented the mechanism, and pitched it directly to the Ford Motor Company. Ford's engineers were impressed. They examined his prototype closely. Then, months later, Ford told him they'd developed their own intermittent wiper independently and no longer needed him. In 1969, Ford released an intermittent wiper system on its Mercury line. Kearns compared the internal circuitry to his own patented design and found it was, component for component, the same. Within a few years, nearly every major automaker, Chrysler, General Motors, Mercedes, and others, had adopted a version of it. Kearns spent the next 2 decades fighting the industry in court, largely representing himself, at real cost to his marriage and his health. He eventually won settlements from Ford and Chrysler worth millions. But he never got to build the wipers himself, which had been the entire point. 60 years after a Canadian firm turned down Mary Anderson, an American automaker did almost exactly the same thing to a man with a working prototype in his own car. Anderson lived a long, largely private life after 1905. She never married, never had children, and spent her later years managing the Birmingham apartment building she'd built decades earlier. She died on June 27, 1953, at her family's summer home in Monteagle, Tennessee, at the age of 87. For most of the 20th century, her name was barely known outside patent records and the occasional local history column, a footnote to an invention that, by then, belonged entirely to the automobile industry, not to her. It wasn't until 2011, 108 years after she filed her patent, that Mary Anderson was formally inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Tonight, on highways across the world, in the middle of a storm, a small lever will move a rubber blade back and forth across a windshield, a mechanism essentially unchanged since a woman sketched it on a New York streetcar in the cold because she refused to accept that the view ahead had to stay obscured.